So let us start first with phonetics. That's a starting point for the language, especially for a culture which believed in oral tradition. Phonetics is going to be very important. The entire transmission of the Vedas from time immemorial has survived several thousands of years on account of scientific methods of oral rendering. This has been possible. You may wonder why. The very fact that we have our pronunciation, we have preserved the oral tradition for thousands of years is the proof that we ought to have developed a science of phonetics. And good developed phonetics ensured an impeccable textual transmission superior to the classical texts of other cultures. That's something very unique about the Vedic scripts and so on, which have transmitted orally. And perhaps that must be the reason for UNESCO recognizing Vedas in form of oral knowledge as a heritage for preservation. I alluded to the same point in one of the earlier videos in the chapter on Vedic corpus, where we talked about the Vedangas and so on. So the study of sounds in a language, particularly the production of sound in a language and how it communicates the language corresponding to the scripts of the language, all these are part of phonetics. The science of study of sound in India, in the Indian knowledge tradition, is known as Siksha, which forms one of the 6 Vedangas. You may recall in one of the videos we talked about it. And the IKS corpus has what is called Pratishakyas. These actually address the issue of how sounds are produced. There is a Rigveda Pratishakya and the Taittiriya Pratishakya are the earliest works on the subject, which actually lays down these rules of phonetics that are required. So Panini also discussed this aspect in Ashtadhyayi by way of some sutras specifying the phonetic rules as well as a separate addendum known as Paniniya Siksha. He also did that. And according to Panini, the origin of the sounds specific to the letters, that is the varnas in Sanskrit, is related to many dimensions, which started from the ideas in the Siksha. Anyway, that's how it is. The origin of the sound in the oral cavity, as we saw in the other video in Siksha, 6 locations have been identified, and the sounds either originate due to these locations or a combination of these. So here is that visual that you see, complete description of the oral cavity and the various parts, the nasal area, the palate, the lips, the throat area, because all of them are involved in production of various varnas. For example, the kanta, which is the throat. The throat part of it is basically generating what is called a, ka, ka, ga, ga, ha, all those. So we saw all these in an earlier video, so I am not really getting into detail again. All that I am saying here is phonetics through Siksha. Siksha as one of the Vedanga, Paniniya Siksha and other things also talk in detail of how we need to pronounce, where the sound originate from. There are certain things which are nasal, ma, na, nga, nya, all those. There is a certain involvement of the nasal activity also and so on. Panini recognized all of them, but he has very elaborate additional material also. I am not really getting into great detail, but in addition to the place of pronunciation, which I showed you in that previous graphic, the throat, the nose, palate and so on, Panini also talked about articulatory effort, and there are many. I have just taken only 2 out of them just as a sort of illustration. If you take the vowels, the a, e, u, a, o and all that, there according to Panini there are 18 variations possible put under categories. First category is what is called Hraswa, Dirgha and Pluta. A is Hraswa, A is Dirgha, A. If you say it for 1, 2, 3, if you take it roughly like that, it's called Pluta. E, E, E. So like that. So he thought there are 3 variations possible. Then you have what is called swaras, udata, anudata, swarita. Meaning, it can be at a same level, the sound from the earlier variation is the same level, or from the earlier variation it can be raised, or from the earlier variation it can be down. So Udata, Swarita and Anudata and so on. Like that there are 3 variations possible. Then he talks about what is called nasal and non-nasal. A is nasal. E is not nasal. E is nasal. You have to use your nose also in making the sound E. U is not nasal. Means there is a bit of, you have to realize there is, air blowing through the nose also. So there are 18 possibilities for alphabets. Of course, there are 1 or 2 exceptions are there for A and R and all that, but by and large. So this is another fine cutting analysis of sound and so on. On the consonants, also there are many variations. I have just taken only what is called Alpa Prana and Mahaprana. You say Ka. Ka is Alpa Prana. You say Ka. Cha, Cha, Ta, Ta. So the Mahaprana, it is called Mahaprana because when you say the Ta, if you put your hand in front of your tongue, you will find a lot of air will blow. If you say Ka, no air will blow. If you say Ka, you will find a lot of air will blow out of your, So that's why it's called Alpa Prana and Mahaprana. Like this, there are many more details. I have not, complicated it. Just to tell you, there is enough effort, observation, deep analysis, classification, all that has happened for identifying the place of pronunciation and the articulatory effort required, and Panini has taken all that into consideration. No wonder, recitation of Vedas will be the gold standard for phonetics, preservation and things of that kind. So there are several accrued benefits. If you, take a good, if a language has a good background on phonetics, it's possible to impart a good phonetical training to language aspirants, closely monitor and rectify the phonetical inaccuracies using these principles. Also, one can arrest deterioration of pronunciation over time and across cultures, and ensuring that the oral tradition preserves and transmits the language components intact. I have been, sometimes seeing videos where Africans are reciting Vedas, in Switzerland and in New Zealand, in England, in Germany, they are reciting Vedas. They are reciting exactly the way Indians are reciting because they have to follow this phonetical tradition, this pronunciation and all those traditions. So that's what it is. So just to summarize, I think the greatest contribution of the Indian knowledge system in linguistics in the field called phonetics is through Siksha, and Panini has also accommodated all of them into his grammatical magnum opus that he created called Ashtadhyayi.